Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and indeed a pleasure to be here today. Very thankful to NASSCOM Foundation, VARINDIA and SPO India for inviting me, and of course all the other organizers who are here. I just wanted to spend a few minutes and share a few thoughts with you on the broader aspects of CSR. We just heard a very, very interesting discussion on a specific part of it, and I want to compliment Charu and all the panelists for a really first-rate discussion. It's rare to see such insight in a brief period coming through. I want to take you first, though, to a broader level and then come back and make a few comments on what we just heard. We have today a mix of people here today, probably very few, but maybe some from government, but certainly from industry and CSOs. And even amongst these, there have been differing kinds of perspectives. When the CSR law first came into force, many of my friends in industry, in fact, I would say an overwhelming majority of them, felt that this is terrible. I mean, what is this? This is something which comes out of our profits. It should be left to us. If we want to do something good, we will, and many of us do. But why is the government mandating this? How can you mandate such a thing? There are lots of questions, lots of doubts, lots of issues. I know a lot of people argued that this is basically shareholders' money. It's for them to decide what to do with it. How can the government decide? On the other hand, there were many of my friends from the CSO community, the civil service organizations, who felt that, one, this was necessary, that businesses make a lot of profits and don't do anything for the community. Number two, many of them, and I'm sure many of you here, had and even continue to have great hopes that this means that suddenly we should be able to see some more money flowing into the NGO, CSO sector, which is always starved of funds. I know that many of the people in the whole CSO sector have been somewhat disappointed because I think Srikanth mentioned the figures when he spoke, 6,000 plus crores, expected to go up to 8,000 plus, possibly even more. My understanding is that, in fact, it should be more. But a lot of that has been used by companies through their own foundations, their own trusts, their own organizations. So not too much has flown into other CSOs. So some disappointment, in fact, a great deal of disappointment there. Industry, on the other hand, has felt somewhat constrained by saying, look, there's a whole list of regulations, do's and don'ts, which is inhibiting what we were doing. And instead of encouraging us to go and do new things, this puts a lot of constraints on us. And we have to do it, so we will do it. But there are too many issues involved. I think the first year in this has been a learning experience. And to the government's credit, as I said, I don't know if there are many people from government here, but to their credit, they did begin to see this, and about a year ago, they set up a committee, a so-called high-level committee, which looked at some of the issues and said, how can we make it easier on all sides to see that this law is now in place, but how is it used well, how is it put into place effectively, how do we minimize the friction and difficulties and make sure that good comes out of it. I was a member of that committee, and we made some recommendations. Some of you may have seen the report, some good, some maybe a bit unhappy with them. But I think the whole process was to try and facilitate it. Just want to pick a few things from there and then talk of some of the other aspects of CSR. The first, and I think to me this is one of the important parts, there were doubts earlier about whether companies are required to spend the 2% themselves for their own programs and projects which they see approved by their board, monitored by their board, which is a requirement in the law, which implied or was interpreted by many companies to say that you can't pool money. Now, we have strongly recommended, and I'm yet waiting for a final government view on this, and I don't think it's come, but maybe I'm not up to date on that. We have strongly recommended that we allow a pooling of money, particularly because a large number of companies, in terms of the 2%, will have small amounts of money to put out into the CSR kitty, and that may not be viable for a full-fledged proper program. And instead of being subcritical, if a number of companies get together, they can do something that creates a real impact. And I think this is one part I want to share with colleagues from industry here and encourage you to do, that can you look at programs where you work collaboratively with other companies to try and pool your money for a common thing. Many of you are looking at specific areas, and you might find other industries, other companies that are willing to do the same thing in the same geographical area, in the same thematic area. And I think if you can get together and work jointly, it will certainly create a bigger impact. It will be more visible, it will create a better sort of sense of it, and obviously, as I don't have to tell the industry this, your overheads get reduced automatically because you don't require as much. You're doing one program on this. The other recommendation, which I just want to flag, is that many people felt that the kind of overhead allowed for this was too small, both for NGOs and for the companies themselves. And we have recommended increasing that amount. So that the idea was that in terms of what you can do to put these programs into action is to support it internally, or for NGOs to be able to provide that kind of support. There's more money kept for that kind of administering, monitoring, evaluating that program, and not just spending money on the program itself, because these are necessary, essential parts for an efficient, effective program. Those were two specific things I wanted to mention from that, but I want to step back a bit more and talk of a slightly more basic issue addressing particularly my industry colleagues. When you look at this 2% of profits, it's probably give or take a little bit here and there. It's probably of the order of 0.5% of your revenues. And so a lot of people, particularly a lot of people in the NGO world, have been saying, hey, this is not a bad thing. In fact, it's good. It's something positive. But we are more concerned not what you do with this 0.5% of your overall business activities, but what you do with the remaining 99.5%. And I therefore want to just broaden this for a minute, and I know that's not the focus. We are talking of CSR and sustainability, but just to give the thought with all of you from industry, saying, I know many of you are aware of this, but wouldn't you want to create greater awareness of this in your own companies and certainly with other companies? And I leave this thought also with Srikanth and NASSCOM Foundation, and the IT industry has been a leader in this, no question, but I do want to give the thought that what about the rest of your business? So while this 2% of profits of a certain category of companies is used for community and social good, are you making sure that the rest of your business, which is in effect 99% of your business, 99+%, is also done in a sense, in a similar way, with integrity, with ethics, with a sense of looking at the community, with a sense of looking at sustainability? So, or is this 2% what I've called elsewhere very frequently the Tirupati syndrome? You commit all the sins you want and then go once a year to Tirupati and drop some money into the box and say, now I'm absolved. Or the Ganga dip syndrome. Do everything you want to sin through the year and then go take a dip in the Ganga and say, now, I washed all my sins off. Is this 2% that kind of thing? Certainly it's not. So when you do the rest of your business, are you looking at these aspects? And this is where I want to relate back to a specific thing on the previous panel discussion. An important part is not to look at the whole issue of disabilities as CSR. Sure, since you have money there, put it in this and that will be welcome. But in your business, when you recruit anybody, is this something you're sensitive about? Is this something you're looking at very specifically and consciously? Is this something that you have instructed your HR to look at? Is this something when you build your grand new campus and spend a few 100 crores on it, that you made sure the architect had made everything disabled friendly? I know it's required under law now, but have you gone out of your way to make sure it's there? Have you put your HR practices into place which enable such people to work efficiently and effectively? Today there is greater awareness of this, thanks, and I think they've done a great job of it. On the gender side, the very strong gender issues that have come up have gotten a lot of regulation and a lot of awareness among companies going beyond regulations to say what do we need to do in terms of gender sensitivity. All kinds of things, some simple things like taking leave at some times of the year, allowing breaks in working from home, all kinds of things. Are we not able to do the same thing for other kinds of categories of people, the disabled people being one among them, as part of our business, not just part of our CSR? I think this is one thing we need to look at. And from that, I want to go back to the bigger picture. This is one part because we just spoke about it. But the same way, for companies that are doing other kinds of things, and we saw a very good documentary on e-waste. What is the responsibility of your company on e-waste? And I can tell you that personally, I know companies that look at this as a nuisance. And many people in the company, top management may be well-intentioned, but at some lower level, this becomes a disposal issue. And how do you do disposals? Inherited possibly, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but from the government, you go out and put a tender. So, I've got 100 computers to dispose of. So, bid for them. And that's completely the wrong way, because it's your responsibility. Sometimes today I know people do pay to take them off because, as you saw in the documentary, there's also value in e-waste. And I know there are good people who extract gold, platinum, all kinds of things from that. But sometimes you may have to pay to get your e-waste taken away. And that's part of your responsibility. It's part of your business responsibility to make sure that your e-waste is disposed of ethically and properly, and not to some guy who picks it up and dismantles it and breaks it up in some little shop in Delhi and burns some of it and takes out the rest of it. That's completely unethical. And is your company making sure that you follow the ethical practices of how you're disposing your e-waste? I'd request each of you to go back and check and make sure that are you following the best practices in this. Otherwise, it becomes a low-level problem where somebody is charged with saying, hey, get rid of all the old computers. So fine, some of you go and Srikanth keeps badgering you, so you give him some computers and say, these others are not in working condition, they're very bad, so let me just junk them. So you give it to the kabadi wala, and you know what a kabadi wala will do with it. He'll do what he's trained to do. He'll take out some stuff and chuck the rest. And the rest then goes somewhere else and goes into a landfill where the cadmium and mercury will lie around and poison your own water, which you will drink sometime in your home. Keep that in mind. So I think the responsibility of industry goes beyond what has been defined in 2%. And CSR is not just about the 2%. It's not the money which the law requires you to put into something. It extends to how you work as a corporate. And I think that is the sense of the corporate social responsibility theme which we should take back. The 2% is a government law, it's a requirement, you do it to comply. Hopefully none of you do it, but sometimes a tick in the box. And I know one or two companies who tell me 2%, it's a nuisance, But I write a check at the end of the year to the Prime Minister's Relief Fund and get done with it. And I think this is the worst way of dealing with it. The reason the 2% came about in many, many people, and the government's real intent behind it, is not to add a tax on you, They could have just put an additional 0.1% of the corporate tax and got the same amount of money and used it as they wanted to. The idea was that corporates have special distinctive capabilities. Distinctive capabilities in managing efficiently, in knowing the customer, as we all take pride in saying we know our customer, we work with customers, customer satisfaction, customer delight. So you know your customers, you know where you're dealing with. You have great systems of feedback, you work in a community, you deal with them. And therefore, the sense was the corporates are the best placed, either in the area they're familiar with or in the work area they're familiar with, to do good work most efficiently, most effectively, and also, very importantly, to do it innovatively, to come up with new things which large government schemes, by their very nature, rarely do. They can't innovate. They're made as a template with one size fits all. Can companies come up with new innovative ways in health, in education, in cleanliness, in sanitation, in any area? And that is what the CSR 2% was intended to do, to saying, look, this is your own money, you spend it the way you want to, but spend it within these areas. Do something interesting, do something good, use your capabilities, not just use your checkbook. Don't just use your bank balance. Use your capabilities and skills, use your thinking, use your managerial capabilities, use your innovative abilities, use the young people you have with idealism, and use your connect with society to go and do something effective, new, and hopefully different. And if that different is very successful, hey, this will feed back into government programs. But even before that, can it feed to what other companies do? And I think this is part of what I know Srikanth and his team have been doing, to take best practices from one area and then see, can we spread them around? And this is what many of you do in the NGO world, that you go around and look. I know that many NGOs do a not invented here syndrome, and I would request those who do that to get out of it. But I know many ones don't do that. They go and look somewhere else in the country where something interesting is happening and say, hey, can we learn from them? And again, going to a panel discussion, some very good examples. And I myself was taken by some of the examples that Meenu gave, and I asked Srikanth promptly that, are you spreading this to other companies? And he told me, yes, we're picking up all these best practices and taking them around. I think that's the kind of thing which we can do effectively in the community here. And I think, to me, the special thing about a gathering like that is just this, that we get to know what others are doing, we get to share what the problems are, but also what the good practices are, what has succeeded, what hasn't, take it back to our own companies, our own NGOs, take it back maybe to government policy, and see what do we need to do to make this more effective. So to me, all in all, the whole opportunity that CSR does and presents is very exciting. It's now, past tense, water down even the Yamuna, whether this is a good law or a bad law. It's a law, it's in place. So what do we do to best use it? And I think these are the few critical things. One, can we work together, particularly some of the smaller companies where the amount of money is not huge, can we work together with a few others to try and work jointly to create a big impact? Number two, can we take best practices from each other using platforms? Many of them exist, but NASSCOM Foundation may be one, to try and see how we can spread best practices. Number three, can we make sure that CSR in our own company DNA is not thought of as 2%. It is thought of as how do we do business and looked at in terms of the totality of your business, your own internal practices, how you deal with your stakeholders, employees, vendors, customers, shareholders, the community around you who are also stakeholders. How do you do business in a proper way? That's the other point which I think is critical. And finally, how do you sort of take all this to create an impact and build sensitivity to the big issues that this country faces with a 1.3 billion population? And yes, we are all proud of 7.6% growth in the fastest growing big economy in the world. But let's not also forget some of the terrible things. The country with the maximum amount of poor people, the country with the maximum amount of starving people, the country with the maximum amount of illiterate people. And as you saw today, some of you must have seen in the paper, the company with the maximum amount of, guess what, slave labor. How do we sort some of these problems out? There are positives, there are negatives. All of us have a responsibility, whether in industry or in the civil society sector or in government. And how can we try and look on this together in some areas to try and see how we can tackle some of these problems? These are both the challenges and opportunities. And I think we are in for exciting times, and it's forums like this where we can share both the excitement and maybe some of our disappointments to move forward positively. Thank you very much.